What's up, everybody? What's going on? Today is another episode of the Lead From Here podcast. I'm Jason. Today we're talking about, what are we talking about? Oh yeah, delivering bad news, which is not a fun thing to do ever, really, because it's hard. It's hard to do because there's a lot of nuance to it. There's a lot of layers to how you deliver and the words you choose and the facial expressions you make when you're delivering it, and all those things can be read in certain ways, and it's ultimately on you to make sure that it's done right. So as you kind of look at this topic, there's three main points, right? One is be as direct as possible. Be gentle, but don't be too soft. If you can't find the words to be specific enough, then you need to go a little harsher. Because if you go too soft and too, sugarcoat it a little too much, it might not come off as the bad news it's supposed to be, and the message might get lost. And if the message gets lost, that puts you in a situation where you're not actually communicating effectively, and now it's misconstrued, and once the game of telephone kicks in, your story is going to be totally jacked. So it's important to really be direct as you can be, but also, deliver it with the right words. Words matter. Well, that's another episode we'll talk about for sure. But that kind of leads into two, is be empathetic. Think about your audience. Think about how this bad news is going to impact them and how they're going to feel hearing it. It may not be directly impactful to them, but it might be impactful to people they care about in the company. And if it is, be thoughtful of how that comes off, because maybe you're talking about something that's happening in another department. Doesn't really mean anything to you or your teams, like directly from a business perspective, but if they have friends in that other department, that can be hugely impactful. And if you are flippant about it, or you're too harsh about it, or you're too vague about it, or you're too just dismissive of like, yeah, it doesn't matter, it's not our team, you can really impact those people negatively, and it can actually erode your trust, and then also erode your relationship with that person or those people. So it's important to really, really be empathetic and understand the words you're choosing and how that will impact them, and just generally how the bad news, whatever that bad news is, how is it going to impact the people you're speaking to? And that goes for every speaking engagement, but really when you're talking about bad news. And then finally, something I do on this channel very often is ramble. So make sure that you're not rambling. Be as short as you can be with it, but also make sure you get the picture is very clear. So don't ramble and don't go on, but also don't make it so short that people don't understand what's happening. They don't get the whole picture from your conversation, you missed. And depending on what kind of bad news it is, you don't want to miss. Really, you never want to miss, but ultimately, in bad news situations, you really don't want to miss. You want to make sure that it's communicated effectively, clearly, and there's no vague, things that could be out there that people are like, I'm not really sure what that means. Like, you want to make sure you're very clear without rambling. And if you're going to ramble, set yourself a time limit. Like, ultimately, go into it, practice what you're going to say a few times, get kind of a rough time, and say, if you get to 5, be like, hey, I think I've talked about this enough. Does anybody have any questions? And that leads to the last point, which is kind of extra on top of the 3 points, is leave time for Q&A. This is something that when bad news happens, a lot of people forget, is that people are going to have questions. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes it's so fresh that and maybe they're embarrassed, if it's depending on what the bad news is, maybe they're embarrassed to ask certain questions. So they'll wait and let you up in a one-on-one or in the hall or wherever. So ultimately it's up to you to make sure that you're giving them a window though there to be in a safe space to ask whatever question they want. Bear in mind, and this is a very, very key piece of this, doesn't mean you have to have all the answers. Do not be afraid to say, I don't know. That's okay. You know what? This is a complicated situation. I'm not sure. I will get the answer and I will get back to you, and I can share it with this whole group. So thank you for your question. Sorry, I don't have the answer, but I'll go find it. That's it. So that's the 3 top things to look at for when you're doing bad news. And then the 4th is just kind of a bonus. Hope this is helpful. And when you're delivering bad news, you got this. Just be empathetic, be direct, and don't ramble on. I appreciate everybody's time. Appreciate you being here. If you have any questions or want me to go deeper on any of these topics, hit me up on the social media platforms or jason@leadfromhere.co. I appreciate you. Take care.